Hello everyone. Is my voice audible? Yeah. Is my voice audible, guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
In last session, we were understanding about the use ref, right? So one of the purpose of the use ref is to store the data. So if you store the data inside the use ref, then that data will not be lost once your component gets re-rendered. Plus, if you want, you can update that data, and whenever you update the data of your use ref, your component will not trigger re-rendering. So this is one of the purpose. And the second purpose of this use ref is using this use ref, we can do the DOM manipulation. Directly, we can do the DOM manipulation. The way we do in the JavaScript. So till now, DOM manipulation handled by React. But if you want, you can directly handle the DOM manipulation as well. So for that, we can use useref. So let's see how we can do the DOM manipulation using this useref concept. So for this, under this components, under this ref, I will create one component here. For that, I'm creating one file, something called ref dom.jsx. Inside this file, let me create one functional component. So this is our functional component. And here simply I will add a title, DOM manipulation using useref. Book. And let's suppose I am adding here one button. Change content and color, or change content and style, I will say. So right now what I have done, I have simply created one simple component in which I have showing one title and one button. And to this div, I will add simply one padding property. Save it. Now, if I render this component inside my app component, so I will just comment this part. Here I can import ref DOM component, and we can render that ref DOM component. We will be able to see that UI on the screen. So let me just add here one break statement. So we got here. Now my requirement is, if I click on this button, I want to change this content. Right now we are showing the title like DOM manipulation using useref hook. Now, if I click on this button, I just wanted to show here content like DOM got manipulated using useref hook. I just want to show the content like DOM manipulated. So basically my requirement is I want to change this content the moment I click on this button. It means I need to do the DOM manipulation. This time directly I want to handle the DOM manipulation. So for this, what we have to do is, the first step is import useref hook. That is the first step. So for this, in our component, nothing but in our file, we have to first import useref hook. Second step, call the useref hook. Call the useref hook in the component. Now, second step is we have to call this hook. Now, whenever you call this hook is going to return one reference, right? So basically it returns one reference, which is in the object format. So here I will take one variable. I will just say something like h2 reference. This is just normal variable. So what this useref is going to do, it is going to return one object. That object we are storing inside useref. So it returned one object, and that this object we are storing inside this variable. Now, can you guys tell me in this object how many properties we have?
One property, current.
Yes. So there is only one property whose key name is current. Okay. And to this property, right now the value is undefined. But instead of undefined, if you want, you can assign any kind of value that you want. So here, whenever we are going to use useref for the DOM manipulation, better it is recommended to assign default value as a null. So here it will be like null. So second step is call the useref hook in the component and assign null as a default value. Third step, add ref attribute to the JSX element. Add ref attribute to the JSX element and assign reference created by useref as a value. To it. So what we have to do? Now, third step is we have to assign a ref attribute. We have to assign ref attribute to the JSX element, and we have to assign reference which is created using useref hook. We have to assign reference created by useref hook as a value. So the meaning of this is to this h2, because on this h2 I want to do the DOM manipulation. So to this h2 we have to add ref attribute, and we have to provide this reference h2 reference as a value to this ref attribute. This is the third step what we have to do. So let me just take this screenshot and let me paste here. This is the third step what we have to do. Now, once you attach this reference to your JSX element, now using this reference, we can do any kind of DOM manipulation on this h2. So let's assume that whenever we click on this button, we want to change the content of h2. So for this, I will assign here on click event listener. I will assign one event handler, something like change content style. Now this function I have to define here. Now whenever you click on this button, this function will be called. Now inside this function, we have to write the logic to do some DOM manipulation on this h2. So tell me in your JavaScript, if you want to do the DOM manipulation on any HTML element, what is the first step we have to do in our normal JavaScript? So let's assume that you have created one HTML file. In that HTML file, you have heading element. Now you have one button. Now, whenever you click on this button, let's assume that we are calling one JavaScript function. We are calling one JavaScript function. Now, inside this JavaScript function, I need to write some code to manipulate this h2. Basically, I want to change the content of this h2. So, what are the steps we are going to follow? What is the first step we follow? Anybody remembered? We have already done right this in the JavaScript. If I click on this h2, if I click on this button, this h2 content should be changed. So how you do the DOM manipulation? Anybody remembered?
ID of button, we will take document of get element by
So
ID
what
or
do we
tag
call
name.
to that part? First, we have to get the DOM,
ID or tag name.
no, DOM element of this h2 element, right? We have to access the DOM element of this h2. How to access the DOM element of h2 in your JavaScript? For that, we have multiple ways. You can access using its tag name also. You can access its using its ID value, class name, using name attribute also. So let's assume that here we don't have ID. So I want to access this h2. I want to access this h2 using tag name. Then how do we access this h2's DOM element using tag name? For that, we have document dot get element by tag name, or else you can use document dot query selector. Suppose if I assign ID here, how to access DOM element of this h2 based on ID value? For that, what is the object and function we use? If you guys are not able to remember, means there is no use of learning React, guys. Remember, before you go for React interview, your JavaScript knowledge will be tested. And if you don't answer JavaScript, you will never get the job in React. They will never ask you any question on React. They will simply reject you there itself. Remember, you go for any React interview, 100% they are going to test your JavaScript knowledge. So if you guys are not revising your JavaScript, then it will be very, very difficult for you to get the job.
Get element by ID.
So for that, simply we have to use document dot get element by ID. And here we have to pass the ID value. In our case, it's a title. So now what this line is going to do? This line is going to return the DOM element of that h2. It will return h2 DOM element. Right? So here, if you want DOM element of your h2, then you have to write this code. But when it comes to React, React will provide us that DOM element directly. So whenever we are going to load this component, then what React will do, it will get the access of DOM element of this h2, and it will assign that DOM element to this current property as a value, So internally, what React is going to do, internally React is going to access DOM element of this h2, and it will assign that DOM element as a value to this current property. So if you want to access DOM element of h2, then simply you have to do h2ref dot current. So h2ref dot current is equivalent to this code, document dot get element by id. It is equivalent to document dot get element by id. So now using h2ref dot current, you can access DOM element of h2. And once you have DOM element of h2, on that you can do any kind of DOM manipulation. I want to change the content. So for that, I can simply use inner text. Inner text equals to, let's assume that I am adding DOM manipulated using ref concept. Now if I go back here and let me refresh and let me click on this, I got here DOM manipulated using ref concept. So we are able to do the DOM manipulation. If I want, I can change the color of this content as well. Can you tell me in JavaScript, if you want to change the color of your content once you have DOM element, for that, what code we have to write? So I have the access of DOM element. Now using this DOM element, how can we change the color of content? Anybody remembered? We have to say h2 DOM element dot style dot color equals to red. Now if I come back here, here also I can do the same thing. h2ref dot current. Till here I will get the access of DOM element. Once I have the access of DOM element, on that I can call style. On style I can call color, and I can just mention some color here. I'm just mentioning red. So let me refresh. Here we have DOM manipulation using use ref hook. If I click on this, I got DOM manipulated using ref concept. So like this, we can create any number of references. So we have created one reference for h2. In the same way, if I want, I can create one more reference for button also. If I want to do any kind of DOM manipulation on button, for that I can create one more reference. So here I can create like let button ref equals to use ref. Now this button ref, I have to assign to this button. How to assign? For that, we have to use ref attribute, and to that ref attribute, we have to assign this reference, button ref. That's it. Now, using button ref dot current, you can do any kind of DOM manipulation on the button. Let's assume that I want to change the color of this button, content color. Right now, content color is in the black. I want to show that in the red. Now, how to access DOM element of button? For that, simply we have to say button ref dot current. That's it. Now, this line will give you the access of DOM element of that button. Now, once you have that DOM element, on that, you can do any kind of DOM manipulation. So here style dot color equals to red. You can do any kind of DOM manipulation. Here I will just add one more, that is padding. 10 pixel, 20 pixel. If I just go back here, refresh, if I click on this button, I got it. Padding also added to this button, and color also got changed. So like this, directly, if you want, you can do the DOM manipulation as well, using the concept called use ref. So one more use of this use ref hook is to do the DOM manipulation. And if you want, you guys can go through their documentation. So just search for use ref in React Dev. React.dev is the official documentation of your React. So here they have given all the information of use ref. So whatever I have explained, everything is presented here. So whenever you guys get a time, just go and read this documentation. So react.dev, this is the official new documentation of React. So always keep the habit of reading the documentations. Here they have explained everything about the use ref. So one of the use cases using use ref, we can do the DOM manipulation. So it's particularly common to use a ref to manipulate the DOM. So anyways, I have explained you use ref. Now you try to read this documentation and check whether you guys are able to understand this documentation or not. This is one more use case for your use ref. Now, how many refs we can create like this? You can create any number of refs. And you can assign those refs references to your any JSX element to do the DOM manipulation. How to assign? For that, simply we have to use ref attribute. Remember, ref attribute we have to use. And to that ref attribute, we have to provide our reference. We have to provide our reference. Understood? How to do the DOM manipulation using this use reference, use ref hook. Anyone, any doubts or any confusion up to here? So what is the difference between React and JavaScript when it comes to DOM manipulation here? Here explicitly we are writing the code to get your DOM element. Explicitly we are writing the code. But when it comes to React, here we need not to write this code. This code is eliminated from us. Now this will be taken care by accessing the DOM element will be taken care by React. So internally React will access the DOM element of your JSX elements and it will assign that to the value of a current property. It will assign as a value to the current property. So now using h2ref.current, you will get the access of DOM element. And once you have the access of DOM element, then on that you can do any kind of DOM manipulation. You can do any kind of DOM manipulation. So only this part is got eliminated. In JavaScript, we have to write the code to get the DOM element. In React, React is helping us for that. Okay, this is about the use ref. How many hooks you know right now? Can you guys mention those hooks? What are the hooks you guys know?
Use state,
Use state. We have learned use state,
use ref,
use ref,
use context.
use context. And one more,
Use effect.
use effect. Already I have given the video, right? To go through that. Use effect. So these are the 4 hooks which you guys know. We have to learn one more hook which is very important, that is use reducer. Use reducer. Okay. So let's understand about use reducer hook.
Excuse me, use effect, did we,
I have shared video already, right? Have you guys gone through these videos? So when I have given the break, I have told you guys to go through all these videos in that break. So yeah,
Okay.
okay, use effect hook. There are two videos. So it's almost 3 to 3.5 hours content. You guys have to go through that.
Yes, sir. But having some questions related to mount and unmount phase and side effects on that user.
Yeah, you can let me know tomorrow. Okay, I will take tomorrow that questions. Or else, yeah, you can ask right now. Yeah, what are the questions you have?
That mount, how we are using side effects and also mount and unmount phase. That questions.
What is side effect?
Uh, s-
I see.
some indirect effect
I
if you
have
are doing.
explained. I have explained in that video, right? What is
Nice.
side effect?
Like for example, from external reference, if it is happening in uh, content in our content, so that for example, if we are adding a two numbers and if we are taking the third from an any other number, I mean already the number is been present, then we are trying to add, then that effect is called as a side effect.
Hmm. So can we call that network calls as the side effects,
Yes.
right? So whatever side effects you want to handle in React, React told side effects in React you can handle at two places. The first place is inside the event handler. Another place is it gave us a hook called use effect. Side effects you cannot handle inside the component directly. Inside your component, you should not handle directly. So if you want to handle any side effects inside your component, then you have only two places, that is event handler and the use effect. Why side effects are not handled directly in the components? Because side effect might affect the flow of your component. That is the reason it is recommended to handle side effects inside your event handler or use effect. Event handler, you can handle it. But if you're handling in the event handler the side effects, then for that you have to do some kind of operation like click of button or checking the checkbox. After doing certain action, then only you can trigger event handler. But if I want to perform some side effects, once my component is mounted in the mounted on the screen. Once my component is mounted on the screen without doing any kind of actions, I want to perform some side effects. How to do that? For that, React provided us the hook called use effect. So if you want to perform any side effects, once your component is mounted, then that side effects you can perform inside the use effect hook. Yeah. So any other question? Any other doubt? And in that video, I have explained you how use effect works. What are the different scenarios we can handle with use effect?
Sir, I'm sorry. Can you share the link on chat?
Already I have shared in the here, right? Already on the GitHub I have added. We have here file videos.txt. Here you will find that links.
Okay.
Okay. So have you guys not watched all these videos? So we had a break of almost 10 days, right? I told you guys to watch all these videos. Don't waste your time, watch all these videos. Here I have added promise concept video. I have added use params, use search params, protected routes, use effect. Use effect, there are two videos. In that, first watch part one, then you watch part two.
So in that first video on param and search param, I think it is continuation of other video, I guess. So that
Already I have explained the topics. Routing part only, nested routing, all those I have explained.
okay.
Okay. So let's come back here. Now next is use reducer. Anybody knows what is use reducer hook? Okay. So use reducer, it is a one of the hook in React. It is used to handle complex data of the component. It has same purpose of use state. So basically what we do, we using use state. Using use state, we handle the data. So basically using use state, we get the state variable. Inside that state variable, basically we store the data. And we manage the data or handle the data. In the same way, use reducer is also one more hook which React is providing to us. And using that hook also, we can store the data. Using this use reducer hook also, we can store the data. To store the data, again, this hook will provide us one more state variable. In that state variable, you can store the data, plus you can manage the data. So there are two ways in React to store and manage the data. That is use state and use reducer. But use state we use if you want to manage simple data. If data is very simple and if it is very small, then we go for use state. If you think that there is some data which is little complex to manage, then such data we can manage using use reducer. So here we have to understand how we can manage and store the data using use reducer hook. How to store and manage the data using use reducer hook. So there are two ways to store and manage the data. One way is using use state, and one more is using use reducer. So now we are going to understand how we are going to manage our data and store the data using use reducer. So for this also, the first step is you have to import this use reducer hook. Now second step is call the use reducer hook. Now whenever you call this use reducer hook, this use reducer hook will also return one array. This hook will also return one array. How your use state is returning one array, in the same way, use reducer will also return one array. Now this array we can destructure. If you want, you can destructure this array. Now this array also contains exactly two elements. Exactly two elements. How your use state returns one array and that array contains exactly two elements. In the same way, use reducer will also return one array and this array also contains exactly two elements. The first element of this array is state, which is common for use state also. But second element is one special function called dispatch. Second function called dispatch. Dispatch is a predefined function. So second element will be one predefined function called dispatch. So it means whenever we are going to call use reducer, whenever you call use reducer hook, it is going to return one array. So that array we can destructure. That array we can destructure. In that array, exactly you have two elements. The first element is state, and second element is one predefined function called dispatch. One predefined function called dispatch. So the difference between use state and use reducer is both returns array. In use state, the first element is state, second element is a setter function. But when it comes to use reducer, here the first element is state and second element is one special function called dispatch. Special function called dispatch. Okay. This is the second step. Third step, let me explain one more part about it. Use reducer hook takes two arguments, and they are, the first argument is one function, and that function have a special name called reducer. And second argument is initial data. Initial data that we want to store inside our state. So use reducer hook takes two arguments, and they are one function, which we call that function as a reducer function. And one more is second argument is your initial data. Initial data. So whenever you call use reducer hook, whenever you call this use reducer hook, now this use reducer hook takes two arguments. The first argument is your reducer function. Reducer function. And second argument is initial data. Initial data. So whatever data you will pass as a second argument, that data will be stored inside your state. That data will be stored inside your state. Inside your state. That data will be stored inside your state. And this state we can update using reducer function only. Reducer function is responsible for updating your state. For updating your state. Second argument, whatever you pass, that data by default, it will be stored inside your state. Now, if you want to update this state with some value, then you can update your state using reducer function. Reducer function. If you want to call this reducer function, then we use dispatch. So dispatch is a predefined function which can trigger reducer function. Which triggers reducer function. So we have to understand this flow. What is that flow? State will be updated using reducer function. Reducer function can be called using dispatch function. Using dispatch function. So this is what flow you have to understand. This pattern you have to understand. This is the pattern of your use reducer hook. So if you want to update your state, then we have to call reducer function. We have to call reducer function. And we cannot call reducer function directly. To call reducer function, we have to call dispatch function. We have to call dispatch function. So from your component, you can call dispatch function. Dispatch will call reducer. and reducer can update your state. Reducer can update your state. Reducer can update your state. So this flow we have to remember. So first, let's take one simple example and let's try to understand the syntax and the concept. So for this, under the component, I will create one subfolder called reducer. Under that reducer, I am creating one file called reducer, or here simply I will say use reducer.jsx. I'm creating one simple functional component here called use reducer. Simply I will add here one h2 and I will say understanding or use reducer I will add here. Use reducer hook. Okay. Now let's assume that in this component I want to maintain some data. If I want to maintain some data, we have two ways. One is using use state. Another way is using use reducer. This time I want to go with use reducer. So to go with use reducer, the first step is you have to import that hook. Use reducer. Once you have imported that hook, you can call that hook. You can call that hook. So whenever you call this hook is going to return one array. That array we can destructure. Now this array contains exactly two elements. The first element is state. Second element is dispatch. Second element is dispatch. So what we did, first we have imported use reducer hook. Then we are calling that hook. Whenever we call this hook, it returns one array. That array we are destructuring. That array contains exactly two elements. The first element is state, second element is dispatch. Now this use reducer hook takes two argument. Remember, it takes two argument. Use state takes only one argument. Use reducer takes two argument. The first argument is reducer function. Now this is not predefined function. It is our user defined function. We have to create this function. So this function we can create outside our component. So create this reducer function outside your component, or in some other file also if you want, you can create. Right now I am creating in the same file but outside my component. So here I am just creating here const something called reducer function. You can give whatever name you want to give for this reducer function. It is simply one function. Okay, we have to understand a little bit more about reducer function. Right now, you can think that reducer is a simple function. So I have created that simple function, and that function I am passing as a first argument to my use reducer. If you want, you can create that function here also. But if you create that function here, it becomes a little bit complex because we have to write some code here. That's why it is preferred that create reducer function in some other file, or else try to create outside your component, So right now I am creating in the same file of component, but outside the component. Now this function we can pass as a first argument. Second argument is initial data. Initial data means you can pass any type of data. You can pass string, you can pass number, you can pass object, you can pass array, you can pass any data. So let's suppose I am passing number 100. Now if you are passing 100, whatever data you will pass as a second argument, by default that data will go and store inside this state. Now let's suppose this 100 I want to show on my screen. So what I can do here, simply here I can bind that state. I can bind that state. So let's see if I am binding my state, what data it will display. So for this, we have to render this component. So I will go back to my app.jsx. I will import use reducer hook component, and here simply I will say use reducer. If I go back here, now I got here, see, use reducer. So let me comment this ref DOM, and here let me just add style padding 100 pixel. Now see, use reducer hook, and we are showing here 100 on the screen. So remember, second argument is like the initial data. You can pass any type of data. If I want to pass string, I can pass string also. So if I go back here, I got here string. If I want, I can pass one array as well. Okay, here I am just passing some array. So if I am passing array, now state became array. How to access the first element? Array of 0. If you want, you can pass one object as well. Okay, CT, I will say here something like tally. So now, if you are storing one object inside your state, then here we have to do state.ct. So the point is, you can pass any type of data as an initial. Okay. So just to understand this concept in much more easier way, I'm just passing one number. Now here we have to remove this .ct so that 100 will be displayed. Understood up to here? First step called use reducer hook. It has state and dispatch. And we have passed reducer function. Now this is the pattern of this concept, okay? So we have to follow this pattern. This pattern is created by your React people. Now let's assume that I have a button. Something called update state. Now my requirement is whenever I click on this button, I want to update this state. I want to update this state. So whenever you click on this button, I want to call a function called modify state. Now here I will define that function, const modify state. Now how can we update this state? This state we can update using this reducer function only. Using this reducer function. Now what is reducer? Reducer is a user-defined function. Reducer is a user-defined function. Which is used to update this state. Update this state. Which is used to update this state. Reducer function takes one argument, and that is object. Not argument, I should say parameter. Reducer function takes one parameter, and that is object type. That parameter is object type. Object type. Reducer function stores a special object special object in its parameter, and that is action object. So the meaning of this is this reducer function takes one parameter. Okay, whatever name you want to give for that parameter, you can give. But that parameter stores one object, and that object we call as an action object. That is the reason what people recommends. They recommends to take this parameter name as an action only. It is just recommendation. If you don't want to take this parameter name as an action, then you can skip it. You can take whatever name you want. But why people prefer to take this parameter name as an action? Because inside this parameter, we are going to store one special object, and the name of that special object is action object. That is the reason, just not to get confused, we take this parameter name as an action. Parameter name as action. And this reducer function, whatever it returns, that data will be updated in this state. Now this reducer function, whatever it returns, this function, whatever it returns, that data will be updated inside this state. So inside this reducer function, we have to write the logic to update our state based on different situations. So inside the reducer function, we have to write the logic to update our state. Inside the reducer function, we have to implement logic to update state. And update state. So inside this reducer, what logic we are going to write means, we are going to write the logic to update our state. You can write any kind of logic. Okay, but remember, whatever this function is going to return, for example, right now I am hard coding, I am returning Kabir. So whatever this function is going to return, that data will be updated inside your state. So whenever we call this reducer function, is called, and if this function is returning some data, that data will be updated inside this state. Now, whenever you want to update this state, you have to write some logic inside this function. And that logic should return some data, and that data will be updated inside your state. Now, whenever I click on this button, I am calling this modify state function. Now, inside this function, somehow I want to call this reducer function. Now, we cannot call this reducer function directly. So, to call this reducer function, we have to call dispatch. Whenever you call dispatch, internally dispatch is going to call your reducer function. And this reducer function, whatever it returns, that data will be updated inside your state. So if I go back here, if I click on this, I got here Kabir. So if you call dispatch is going to call reducer function. Whatever this function returns, that data will be updated inside your state. And this dispatch is going to do two things. Let's try to understand about the dispatch now. Now, what is dispatch? Dispatch is a predefined function. Dispatch is used to call reducer function. Dispatch will re-render the component. Okay, dispatch will take care of re-rendering the component. So these are the two purposes. Dispatch is used to call reducer function, plus dispatch will re-render the component. And one more, dispatch can take one argument, and that argument is action object. Action object. If you want, you can pass one argument to the dispatch function. One argument. Now this is the dispatch. If you want, you can pass one argument to this dispatch function. And argument should be object type. And whatever object you are passing to this dispatch, that object is called action object. This object is called action object. So what is action object? Action object is a special object. Is a special object in React. Action object should have one mandatory property, and that is type, and whose value should be some unique string, unique string across the application. So what is action? Basically, action is one object only. It's just one object. But this object contains one mandatory property. One mandatory property, that is type. And whose value should be some unique string. It should be some unique string. Unique string. Whose value should be some unique string. So it's mandatory that there should be a one property, that is type. Apart from this, you can pass any number of other properties as well. You can store any number of other properties. You can store any number of other properties. But in this object, there should be one mandatory property, that is type. Apart from type property, if you want, you can store or you can pass any number of properties. Apart from type property, we can add any number of properties inside the action object. Now from second property, you don't have any restrictions. You can take whatever key you want. You can assign whatever value you want. You can assign string, boolean, object, array, whatever you want, you can do. But for type property only, value should be one unique string. And key, the key of that property should be type only. So any object which contains type property with a unique string value, such objects are called action objects. Such objects are called action objects. So what is action? Action is a simple object which contains one mandatory property, that is type. So minimum one property this object will have, that is type, and that is mandatory. So if you want, for this, you can pass type and some value I am passing here. Okay, for example, dummy. Any unique string you have to pass. Now, whenever you call dispatch, dispatch is going to call reducer, and this object will go and store inside this parameter. Will go and store inside this parameter. Okay. So what is the use of this action object? You will come to know. So here, just try to understand the syntax, how it works. So when it comes to use reducer, here you have to understand few things, few terms like state, dispatch, reducer, and action object. Action object. These are the terms which we have to remember. And all these terms we are going to use in our Redux concept as well. So if you understand use reducer concept, you will understand you understood already 40% of your Redux concept. So this pattern we are going to use inside the Redux concept as well. So Redux is considered as more complicated topic in React, the most complicated topic in React. So 40% of Redux already you understood if you understand use reducer hook. Okay. So use reducer hook takes two argument reducer function initial data. It returns one array which contains exactly two elements, state and dispatch. Now second argument will be the initial data to your state. If you want to update this state, you can update using reducer function only. Whatever reducer function is going to return, that data will be updated inside your state. Now to call this reducer function, we have to use dispatch. So we can call dispatch and internally dispatch will call reducer function. Whatever this function is going to return, that data will be updated inside your state. That data will be updated inside your state. Now inside this reducer function, we have to write some logic to manipulate our state based on the requirement. Based on our requirement, to manipulate our state, whatever logic is required, all that logic we are going to write inside our reducer function. Reducer function. And dispatch takes one argument, that is one object, and that object we call as a action object. So basically this action object we use to pass some data to our reducer function. So in future, if you want to pass any data to your reducer function, then we take the help of this action object. If you want to pass any input data to this reducer function, that is where this action object will come into picture. So if you don't want to pass any data to the reducer function, then no need of passing this action object. So right now for this example, we don't require this action object. Understood, guys, how use reducer is working? Pattern of this use reducer. So the purpose of use reducer and use state is same. Both are used to store and manage the data only. Just pattern is going to change. So if you have very complex data and if you think that you are performing lot of operations on your state, in that case, use reducer will be more preferred compared to use state. Yeah, if you have any doubts, let me know. If you don't have any doubts, yeah, you guys can drop. Let's join tomorrow and let's continue this topic, use reducer topic.
So here, sorry. Okay.
Pardon?
Here you are saying dispatch will re-render the component, right? Will it
Yes.
not affect the performance?
No, we require re-rendering, right? If without re-rendering, you cannot get this updated data on the screen, right? For example, right now, what is the data we are showing on the screen? 100. Okay. And this 100 is because of state. Now you are updating the state. After updating the state, you have to update your screen also. Then only that updated value will be shown on the screen. If you don't update your screen, then you cannot see that updated value here. So to get that updated value on the screen, we have to re-render. That is the reason re-rendering is required. So when you go for re-rendering, you go for re-rendering whenever you want to show updated data on the screen. Now, if there is no re-rendering, then you cannot see that updated data on the screen. So you have to understand when re-rendering is required, when re-rendering is not required.
Okay, even if it is re-rendering is required and if we want to update the UA, then only we should go for the use reducer, right? If we don't want to update any UI, then no
No
need to
need to
use.
go. No need to use.
Okay,
Any data
and
which you are showing on the screen, only that data we can store inside this state, whether that state you created using use state or use reducer.
okay, and the type parameter is the mandatory one for dispatch.
No, it's not mandatory.
Okay,
That object is not mandatory, but if you are passing this object, then this type property is mandatory.
okay,
In our case, we don't require this action object right now. If you don't pass this action object, still your code is going to work. But if you think that you have a requirement to pass some data to this reducer function so that using that data, you will perform some operation. In that case only, we have to pass this action object. But if you are passing action object, then it is mandatory to pass type property with some string value. Okay, that you will understand a little bit more in tomorrow's session.